Hello, and welcome to our short CIPS revision guide on procedures for competitive tendering. In this presentation, I'm going to explain what you need to know for your CIPS exams, including what tendering is all about and the different generic types of competitive tendering procedure that exist. Firstly, I just want to point out that we are not going to be touching on public sector regulations for tendering. That's a separate, detailed subject in its own right, and it very much depends on how each country has interpreted and adopted into their statutory legislation the multilateral government procurement agreement from the World Trade Organization. So, today we, just like CIPS, will be considering how tendering applies in all sectors, not just the public sector. So let's start by clarifying what we mean by competitive tendering. We are talking about a formal, arm's-length competitive bidding process where the buyer formulates an invitation to a supply market for like comparative offers. The goal is to compel the market into competing with their peers to produce bids based on the best value possible, and so to do this, the buyer needs to take maximum advantage of competitive leverage in the market. This means making the tender process formal and as equal for everyone as possible. If the same rules apply for all players and the criteria upon which the winning bid will be identified are clearly known in advance, then competition is heightened for all parties. To put it bluntly, they know they can't circumvent the process, and so they need to follow the tendering rules and submit the best possible tender in order to win. In theory, all the buyer then needs to do is to accept the best offer from the tenders that have been submitted. Now, there are three generic types of tendering procedure: open tendering, restricted tendering, and negotiated tendering. None of these is necessarily better than the others. They are simply different procedural mechanisms aimed at delivering the best possible outcome from different types of competitive market. So, let's start with open tendering. As with many business terms, there's a clue in the title. An open tender simply means a tendering procedure that is open to any bidder to submit a tender. The process is therefore relatively simple, but highly effective. The buyer specifies their requirements, and as well as the criteria that they're looking for to win the contract, they invite suppliers to submit their tenders in accordance with the stipulated instructions within a fixed deadline. This type of procedure works best where the specification can be clearly expressed and commonly agreed in known terms, and where perhaps there are a fewer number of acceptable suppliers, typically 10 suppliers or less. If used correctly, the open procedure can be the most efficient and the least time-consuming of all of the tendering procedures. However, there are risks with this type of tender, and one of the most obvious ones is that you can end up receiving a large number of bids from a diverse range of sources, leaving the buyer's evaluation team with a significant task of assessing each bid. It's for this reason that many buyers will adopt the restricted procedure instead. Again, as the name suggests, restricted tendering requires the buyers to invite tenders from a limited number of bidders. So to do this, the buyer invites expressions of interest and then down selects a smaller number of pre-qualified bidders to submit a tender. This is sometimes referred to as the two-stage tendering process because the initial pre-qualification selection stage is followed by the tendering stage. The procedure is therefore a little more involved than the open tendering, but not necessarily more time-consuming, as the buyer is whittling down unsuitable suppliers and therefore building in efficiency to the process. Restricted tendering is more suited to widely competitive markets where there are many potential suppliers, and therefore it's beneficial to hone down the number of bidders before inviting tenders. So far, both the open and the restricted tendering procedures have involved arm's length approaches to the market. Both procedures assume the requirements can be easily and readily specified and that competition will be generated so that the highest value bids from the market can be made. However, we know that this isn't always the case, and this is where the negotiated tendering procedure comes into play. The negotiated tendering procedure introduces an additional stage of post-tender negotiation, where the buyer will enter into negotiations with the supplier over their bid. This is usually to improve the offer or offers that have been made, typically by improving the quality of the bid or the commercials as well. As you can imagine, this would seem to be highly attractive as an option for procurement professionals, because there is the opportunity to drive additional incremental value from the supply market. But this isn't always the case. For example, in some markets, if bidders know in advance that they're going to be entering into post-tender negotiations, they may hold back value during the bidding process so that they then can yield a little bit more during the subsequent negotiation. So in these scenarios, negotiated tendering can start to introduce games between the buyer and the bidders. And this could even lead to a degree of distrust before the contract has been agreed and finalised. In many public sector procurement regulations, negotiated tendering is therefore limited for use in only specific scenarios where it's warranted by the supply market conditions. So, there you have it. Tendering is a formal bidding procedure that allows buyers to extract the best value from a competitive market in a professional and a systematic manner. For your CIPS exams, you need to know when tendering is advantageous or when other less formal approaches are better suited, such as requests for quotations or requests for proposals. Remember, the three main types of tendering procedure are based on the number of stages. These are open tendering, which is a single stage process without any pre-qualification; restricted tendering, a two-stage process that involves pre-qualification prior to the bidding; and finally, negotiated tendering, a three-stage process that allows for post-tender negotiation. So I hope you found this helpful. Do remember we have other bite-sized revision clips on the Cordie YouTube channel, and so you might be interested in our single sourcing clips or our negotiation clips. But in the meantime, I wish you well with your CIPS exams. Thanks for watching, and please remember to like and to subscribe for more CIPS exam revision tips. Thank you.